All right. Well, good morning and welcome to Adult Forum. And we're so glad to have Dr. Grace Ji-Sun Kim as our speaker today on the topic of actually an overview of her, I think her latest book, not the one that she's currently working on, one that I have been reading and thoroughly enjoying and reflecting on this week, including the snippet I was reading this morning. But the book is Earthbound, God at the Intersection of Climate and Justice. I give a brief bio of her, who I feel like I have begun to know because I've been reading several of your books, including several that I see behind you, Keeping Hope Alive. I think I have the last chapter, When God Became White,
Oh,
and a
thank
few of the
you.
other ones. But um, Dr. Kim was born in Korea, educated in Canada, and now teaches in the United States. She's the author or editor of 25 books, several of which are behind her. She's the co-editor for the Palgrave Macmillan series, Asian Christianity in the Diaspora, and have served on the American Academy of Religion's board of directors. I think you're currently a uh, professor, correct, at Earlham School
Yes.
of Theology. Also, the host of the Madong podcast, hosted by the Christian Century and an ordained Presbyterian Church USA minister. Um, So if you have anything else you'd like to give on your introduction, feel free to, but we're so glad to have you here back again. I think last time we saw you, you were here in class and then you spoke in the chapel, and we're thrilled to have you here. We'll hand it over to you, and again, we'll be available for Q&A. There will be some, I think we discussed ending a little bit early uh,
Yes.
for some question and answer. And if you have a question that can't wait until the end, I'll just come by with the microphone and we can do that real time. So thank you so much for joining us again. And over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me again. I think this is my third time. So one in Zoom and then one in person, which was so wonderful to meet you all in person and to sign some of your books. And I'm thrilled to be back for my new one, Earthbound. And I know some of you have read it. Thank you so much, and others will read it. It was something I started writing many years ago, and then I couldn't finish writing the book. And once, when God became white, which I talked about in person this past June, was at the publisher's. Uh, I realized there was an aspect of God that I didn't include in When God Became White. And that's what helped me to finish Earthbound. So I've been working on this for a while. Um, I've been working with the World Council of Churches. I was on their working group on climate change, and I've done some international and national work on climate change in the realm of religion and theology. So it's wonderful to write this one. It's my third book on climate change and climate justice. So if you're interested, you can read my other books, Making Peace with the Earth, published by the World Council of Churches, and then Planetary Solidarity, which I co-edited with Dr. Hilda Koster, and that's from Fortress Press. So that one's used widely as a textbook on eco-theology and eco-feminist theology. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'll go till about 9:30ish. I'll cover certain topics arising from the book, and then we'll end with 10-15 minutes of Q&A. So I did prepare a PowerPoint, so I hope it will work this morning. Um, okay, there we go. So Earthbound at the congregation at Duke Chapel for the Adult Forum. Thank you all for joining me. So before we began, we were having some short talks, and I think the church in general has lots of problems, as well as the wider society, about whether climate change is happening, why we're not very interested in the climate change, etc., etc. So it's a societal problem and also a church problem. I'm just speaking in general because there are, of course, many churches who are at the forefront of this climate change issue. 2 weeks ago, I was speaking in Albuquerque and in Santa Fe, so I was in New Mexico, and speaking in a couple of the PCUSA churches and for the Presbytery of Santa Fe. And there are many churches, which I'm delighted to find out in PCUSA, who are at the forefront of this climate justice issue. Some of them have this group called Earth Care Team, which they hope that many more PCUSA churches will adopt. So they were thrilled that I was able to talk on Earthbound at their churches. So those are really good to see. And I hope this congregation at Duke Chapel will also be at the forefront of this climate justice issue and many others, that it will catch on fire, that this is an urgent issue that churches and communities and our society at large and the world at large needs to deal with. So, one of the problems why we're not really pushing for it is that we have subscribed to this fallacy where we can take anything from the earth while the earth will naturally replenish itself. That is a false fallacy. That's a fallacy, and many people ascribe to it that we can take as much as we can, take and take and take, and use as much as we want. We can damage the earth. It doesn't matter because the earth will replenish itself. But science has shown us the only way the earth will replenish itself if human beings are no longer on this planet, because we are one of the destructors of the planet, and we've been destroying it in so many ways and so rapidly that if we continue this path, it will not replenish itself. Science is showing that we are on the road of destruction. So I'm not going to go into too much science because I think people in the class and people in the church may already know a lot about the science and what the scientists have been teaching us. So today, because I'm a theologian, we'll do more on the theology or the theological perspective, the Christian kind of understanding of climate justice to help us move forward. So when we think about climate justice, it's not an individual endeavor. And it's okay that individually we do this because we need all the individuals to do our part in fighting this climate change. But it is going to take the community, the collective, our Christian faith communities to come together to fight this climate change that's happening. So we need churches like you that are gathered together this morning. We need communities beyond the church to really fight this because we need everybody on board. And as people of faith, as Christians, we also have to work with other faith communities. Um, the World Council of Churches, we work with the Buddhist community, the Jewish communities. We need to work together to really fight this climate change that is happening. We also have to recognize that we are all interrelated and interdependent. Humans and other animals, plants, water, air, we are all alive together and we need each other and we're interrelated. If you've ever read Native Americans on the sustainability or climate justice work, or have heard them, they will always talk about their four-legged cousins. So those are the animals on this planet. And for them to kind of name it as four-legged cousins really brings to the forefront that we are interrelated and interdependent. So we really have to understand that what we do will affect others and the animals, the water, and the air. So one of the big issues of our time is this water justice issue. So when I was working on the climate change, on the working group with the World Council of Churches, we do trips in various places. And I believe it was 2023 or 2022 where we were going to Bethlehem, Palestine. This is before Gaza, and many of you may be already aware of the water injustice issues in Palestine before Gaza. So Israel would sometimes cut off water whenever they wish and also send the dirty water into Palestine and keep the clean water in Israel. So we were on our way, there were about 15 of us to go to Bethlehem to see firsthand and to address it to the wider church. So before we left, the secretary told us to delete all emails. So I had deleted all emails from her and from each other. And I had just spoken at a climate justice conference for Peace USA in Virginia, and I had taken a train up to Newark. At the Newark airport, I started opening up my emails to just see what I had missed. And there were several emails from the working group of the WCC telling me not to come. I was one of the last ones to leave because I was speaking at the climate justice conference. And what had happened was, one by one, many of them were questioned at the airport, Tel Aviv, and were detained. Some were released after a day or two, and some were being sent back home. They weren't allowed in. The secretary of the WCC had forgot to delete all her emails, so our names were all there. And for some reason, the Israel government decided to detain us that were part of the working group, and so they just told me not to come because they thought I will be detained or sent back. So I didn't go, but we understand that this water justice issue is enormous. It affects people here in the US, but of course, more drastically, people around the globe. People are not getting clean water to drink, to use for cooking, or for other household necessities. So, this is a huge problem that is happening around the globe. And they say 1 in 3 people around the world do not have access to safe drinking water, which means that billions of people around the world are continuing to suffer from poor sanitation and hygiene. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s in public school, and some of you will be able to relate, we drank from the water fountain. And if anyone told me that someone was going to bottle water and sell it around the world, I would have laughed at that because all you have to do is just turn on the tap and drink that water. But we know that now this water uh, bottle business is a multi-billion-dollar business where they are bottling water, and in some instances, they're not as clean. And we know that plastics are in these water bottles. And so this is a huge problem that is affecting us around the globe. They're bottling, they're being shipped around, so there is already carbon footprint, a large amount, or they're being loaded in trucks around the country and around the continent. So there's multiple layers of problem. So we really need to address this water justice issue. It is a social justice issue, and these all interrelate, and we need to recognize how they interrelate. As we work with other denominations, the Lutheran Church Global, the World Federation of the Lutheran Church, I think I'm not getting it correct, the World Lutheran Federation or something, and I apologize that I can't get the name right. For many years, they had a motto for their church, and their motto was creation, not for sale. You see, God has created the world and has given us freely all what the earth will will provide and continues to provide water, soil, air, nutrients, other materials from the earth. But for some reason, human beings have decided to take what is free, what God has given us, and bottling it or putting it in bags or whatever else we're doing and selling it at enormous profit. So when the Lutherans had this model, it was so poignant, it was so important for the rest of us to listen that creation should not be for sale. Because when we do that, we are damaging the earth. We are taking more than what we need. We are taking resources that the earth needs and damaging and destroying the earth. So we really have to rethink how we live and how we take things for greed, out of greed, and for profit, and to recognize the holiness of creation. We must recognize God's creation as part of God's body. And if you've read Sally McFaig, she talks about the earth, the world as God's body. The other aspect of water justice is this concept of virtual water. So virtual water is the amount of water being used and how we need, with when we're talking about water justice, we're also talking about saving water because we do waste water. Some of us turn on the tap too long. We are doing things that we shouldn't be doing. But sometimes we forget about virtual water. So, how much water goes into making your hamburger or your steak or your stir fried chicken? We know that there is a lot more water that goes into raising cattle, raising pigs or chickens than the water that is used to grow lettuce or tomatoes or spinach or celery. So those who are doing climate justice work want us to recognize the virtual water that goes into the food production. And I've spoken on climate change at a Quaker meeting. So I teach at Earlham, which is a Quaker seminary. Not everyone that teaches or attends are Quaker, just like in any seminary, even at Duke Divinity. Majority may be United Methodists, but there's Presbyterians, there are Baptists, etc. So I spoke at a Quaker church, Quaker meeting, and the Quaker recorded minister said, once I said that we should eat less meat, he said, "Oh, now you're killing me." Because we do love meat. It's not just Americans, but people worldwide, we love to consume meat. I'm not here to tell you you have to be vegan or vegetarian or pescatarian, but to recognize the amount of water that goes in there. So perhaps we could eat less meat. There's many other reasons to eat less meat or no meat, but this is just one additional reason. So we could eat maybe 4 times a week, or 3 times a week, or once a week. We can skip it, maybe eat every other week. But I think recognizing the animal cruelty, there's other reasons for eating less meat. It may be a challenge, or maybe you're already doing it, but also understanding the connection with water justice. So, continuing on with the theme of water, we really have the spiritual relationship with water. We use water during baptism. We cannot have baptism without water. I just finished a 3-year interim minister work at a Presbyterian church. And one Sunday morning when we were doing baptism, I opened, some churches have it differently. Some churches don't cover the font, but this particular church, we covered the font, the baptismal font. And I opened it up and there was no water. So I already had the baby in my arm and no water. So two men ran out of the sanctuary and brought me water. You cannot have baptism without water. Baptism is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. Baptism marks how one becomes part of the family of God. So, water of the baptismal covenant, when we think about it, may be thicker than the blood of family. So, in baptism, we publicly claim within the person that we're baptizing within the body of Christ. So, baptism shows a deeper understanding of who God is and how God connects with us. Baptism ritual that allows us to experience the grace and the presence of God. So, each baptism, we experience the presence of God. So, God uses the waters of baptism to weave our whole selves into God's own life. So, baptism, as you celebrate it in your church, is essential, is important. It roots us to the sacred stories of new beginnings, of new life. We believe as you're baptized, you become new. You are welcomed into the body of Christ. And when we think about some of the biblical stories, the story of Noah and flood, it is a story of trying again, recreating, reimagining a world after so much loss and destruction. The waters are both a destroyer of destruction and a fount through which life pours over all living things. And for some reason this morning, I'm really thirsty. So I'm keeping drinking my tea, but it is to quench our thirst and giving new life. Water can rush over or trickle through and inundate our very lives. But at the same time, it is still objectified, commodified, and taken for granted when we forget that we must all be protectors of water. Native Americans here call themselves water protectors. They are there to protect the water which gives us life. And as Christians, it gives us new life. And so I challenge all of you that we ourselves need to be water protectors, as the Native Americans call themselves. The sacrament of baptism becomes a symbol that all water is sacred. We sometimes forget that as we commodify water. And it's not just the water that is present in the baptismal font, it is all water. And so we need to honor water, take care of water, and treat it with holiness, reverence, and love. I've also attended the COP meeting, the UN COP meeting, the Conference of Parties meeting, which happens around November, December of each year. And one year it was in Marrakesh. So that year in Marrakesh, there were many Aboriginals and natives who came to Marrakesh to really protest the government's action on water. And so we held rallies together outside the meeting place, and many of them called on and their ancestors to show that they are one together and that they are the water protectors. It was really a beautiful way of a protest against the government. So when we think about water justice, climate justice, we recognize that these injustices intersect. And when we're dealing with, I was there in June and I shared when God became white, it was really focusing on racial justice and gender justice. But we recognize that all of these intersect. And so, you as a congregation at Duke, when you're fighting these injustices, you're fighting all of these injustices because they intersect. So, when we think about classism, is never contained within only an economic class status, but it is also dealing with gender justice because we know globally women are more poor. Um, so, that's how we deal, and that's how these injustices intersect. When climate injustice is happening, yes, more women are affected. And so that just reminds us that we're always fighting these injustices together. They're not these little silos, saying as a church, oh, we're only going to deal with gender injustice. No, when you're dealing with gender injustice, you're also fighting climate justice and racial justice and economic injustice. So, recognizing this is really a helpful way. We recognize that young girls are affected more, especially when we deal with the island countries or those who live by the water. When big storms come, their homes get destroyed. And so the men tend to go into the larger cities to find jobs or make money to send back home. Many of their homes are already destroyed, so sometimes the money never reaches or they don't make money. So the women who are left behind are taking care of the young children or the elderly or those who are sick. They don't have the means to feed everyone. And this is how human trafficking happens. It's already been documented widely, so you can read it. The women start selling off their children. This is how sex trafficking happens. So we have to understand how these injustices intersect. We also know that environmental racism exists. We just think of Flint, Michigan, where big corporations dump waste closer to communities of color who are usually poor. They're not going to dump their waste in Beverly Hills. And so this is environmental racism. So, as people of faith and as this congregation at Duke, we really need to come together to work on this ecological justice so that we can sustain life for many generations to come. It is intimately related to all these injustices, and we must lift up the lives of the global poor who are suffering greatly and work towards saving this earth. There are many biblical passages. God blessed them and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. We are to take care of the earth. And, there's many ways to read scripture, and there's also many ways to misinterpret scripture. And so the misinterpreting scripture is and has been and continues to be a way for us to legitimize some of our actions. So, one of them is that some of us have read scripture as we are the best of God's creation. And so we can dominate the earth and destroy it if we need to as we rule. So, in that way, we misinterpret it and we become selfish and greedy. We are created last in the creation story. And so we must be the pinnacle of creation. We are created in the image of God. We must be the best of God's creation. So as we elevate humanity, and this is all tied in with the doctrine of humanity, how you interpret that or how you read scripture, this way of elevating humanity has been very detrimental to the planet and even to ourselves. Uh, we have to kind of understand that we are not better than the rest of creation. We are part of creation and we're called to coexist, to cohabitate on earth as fellow creatures. We are part of creation, so we are tillers and keepers. We are called to tend our relatives, if you want to think about the Native Americans. So it means using only what we need to live. There's a creed, Native American creedal saying, and I don't have it correct this morning. I should have used it as a PowerPoint. When the last fish is eaten, when the last meat is cooked, when the water is destroyed, we will realize that we can't eat money. It's a paraphrase. But we have become so greedy and we've taken so much from the earth, we will realize that the money that we have in our banks or wherever you have invested, the billionaires of this planet, you cannot eat money. I shared earlier that when we're fighting this climate change, we need the community. When I was there in June in person, which I really enjoyed, and I hope to be invited back in person one day, I believe I share the concept of udi, which is a Korean word for hour. So if we understand, and Koreans use our rather than me or I. So if we understand the concept of ourness or we, it will really help us that we need each other. We need the planet. We need the birds. We need the fish to survive. So Pope Francis has talked about Earth as our common home. In Greek, the word is oikos. And so if we understand this planet as our common home, then we understand that we need the animals, we need the water, we need the tree, we need everything because that is part of our home. Ecology studies every living thing and how it interacts with its surroundings and other forms of life. Because I can't cover everything in the book, and I hope you will read the book. And the book has questions at the end of each chapter that you can use it in this adult forum to dig a little deeper because I'm just covering the surface. And there is so much to talk about with climate change and climate justice issues. I began this session by saying I was able to finish this book, Earthbound, because there was an aspect of God that I didn't include in When God Became White. So that's how it helped me finish this, because as a theologian, you can't just talk about the science or just about water. You need to bring in God into the conversation of climate change. And that's why it's so important for churches to talk about this, because this is not just a science issue. It's not just like a global issue. It's not a United Nations issue. This is a church issue. It's a theological issue. It's a Christian issue. So we cannot separate it from the work that we're doing Sunday after Sunday. We cannot separate it from what we do when we're feeding the poor or when we're going on these marches for racial justice. So I'll bring in God and we'll probably close there. So we have many metaphors for God, and I shared that in June from my book. Metaphors are products of particular cultures and contexts and are limited by time and space. Metaphors can also function as a tool for those in power to maintain their power, keeping others subjugated and powerless. So we use metaphors to talk about God. And there's many metaphors, We have, metaphors like Father and Lord and Master and King. What we fail to recognize is that these metaphors point to God, but are not God. And so we cannot use these metaphors to legitimize human dominance over other creatures, which we have done. So we cannot use it. So when we use metaphors like king and lord and master, it somehow legitimizes that we can do the same. If God is master, then I can be a master. And as a master, I can go and take down, destroy as many trees as I want in the Amazon and here in the US. There becomes a link. As I shared before in June, sorry to reference June so much, how we view God leads to how we think and how we behave. So our images of who God is has a huge impact on how we behave. I just returned from speaking at the Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. I think it's the biggest United Methodist church in the US, maybe in the world. I don't know. It's an enormous church. So they had a leadership institute. And as I was signing books, and luckily my book sold out, but that's beside the point. As I was signing books, many people thanked me about talking about God and the metaphors. And one person said, "How can I get the leader of a church to change the words that we address about God?" Because she said it impacts her every Sunday. So if you want more discussion on this, you can go back and read When God Became White. Because what I included here is not what I included in God Became White. But let me just go a little bit quicker because of lack of time. Oh, yes, this is where I wanted to go. So what I didn't include in the previous book, I included here. If we can think about God as a verb, I think it will really help us in our climate justice work. I actually submitted the book as God is a Verb, and then the publisher thought it wasn't a good title. So they changed it to Earthbound. But the point of doing this work on climate change in the book was to get to the point that God is a verb, that God is a being itself who is moving and acting and manifesting through the world, making God's presence known in the world. God is who God is. Thinking theologically with verbs can remind us that we cannot limit God's godness to stagnant metaphors and nouns. Reimagining God as a verb that radiates the being of God. So you may be all a little confused now. Everything else made sense until now, but let me just continue a little bit more. God is to be. That is how it is in the Hebrew Bible. When Moses asked God, "Who is sending me?" God said, "Yahweh," who is to be. If you remember grammar school, to be is a verb. I am, he is, they are. I had to memorize this day in and day out because I went to ESL classes from grade 1 to about grade 3 or 4. I was in there because as a child of an immigrant, I couldn't speak English and they thought it wasn't good enough. So I remember to be as a verb. It's um it's one of those imperfect tense verbs, which means, and this is also in the Hebrew, which is past, present, and future. God is, God was, and God will be. God is evermore. So God to be is action. And that should really help us in our climate justice work. That God is not stagnant, as Greek philosophy taught us, and where Christianity, and early theologians brought over into Christianity. So Greek philosophy was dominant, was very, prominent, and theologians used it to bring into our theological discourse, the early church fathers. So when we think about God as a verb, it is very liberating, it's empowering, it's dynamic, it's non-gendered, it's non-racialized way of speaking about who God is. It embraces God's activity. Just didn't create the world and that was it. God is continuing to create. And science is telling us the universe is expanding. I don't know what all that means because I'm not a scientist. But God is acting and we are called to act. Okay, I shared about the imperfect tense. So when we think about God and Yahweh, when we think about Yahweh, also there's an aspect of the Hebrew word that the name is also pronounced Huhi, which I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but it is part of their oral tradition, how we address God. So who he actually is translated as he, she. And we know that in the Egyptian tradition, the Pharaoh uh, was considered embodying two genders. The Pharaoh was both a man and a woman. So when we think of God as a verb, the God who is being, or the being God, God creates, lives, restores, heals, and love. So I'll just wrap it up here. I think when we think about God as a verb, it really moves us to act. And when we think in the New Testament, it's not just in the Hebrew Bible, but in the New Testament, Jesus says, I am. He uses the verb to be to talk about himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the door. I am the bread. So it's not just an Old Testament, it moves into the New Testament, this unction that God is, Jesus is. So I hope this will help you to recognize the urgency of fighting climate change, that it will motivate you, that it will push you to act, because we are created in the image of God. And if God, rather than saying God is love, God is loving, we are to be loving, loving of our brothers and sisters, but loving of God's creation, of the animals, the plants, the water, the soil, and the air. So I will end it here, and I hope that you will have a more deeper conversation on climate justice and read the book together. And I'm just grateful to be invited back. Thank you so much for listening in person and online. And I'll be happy to answer any questions or hear some of your comments.
All right, thank you so much. And feelings are mutual. We thoroughly enjoyed your visit in June, and I've personally thought about it. And as I'm reading several of these books in the background, have and following you on Instagram, et cetera, and seeing
Oh, okay.
what you're doing also exposes me to a lot of great activity that's out there in the broader world outside of my little area. Which I would just say in my professional work, I'm a facility manager, but that
Oh,
involves areas of sustainability. And I would
oh,
say potentially at work, there might be a sustainability initiative at at your place, or ways where
That is so
we're
good.
looking for like facility ambassadors or just people to help? It's not glorious, but as they're sorting their trash at the cafe, but I mean, there's perhaps programs that you can do, or anything small. I think at times it's just overwhelming to think of where we're headed if we don't change this trajectory, but there's something little that we can do everywhere, and we all need to do something.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much. Any
Thank you.
questions, comments? I have a dozen, but it's not. I'm, yeah, okay,
I
here we
know
go.
there's church after, so everyone has to leave.
Thank you so much for your talk and for this wonderful book. And I was wondering, as I was listening to you talk about the many different kinds of churches that you visited, and it sounded like, the United Nations or NGOs, like you seem to be connected with so many different kinds of institutions. And I was wondering if, from your perspective, you could give us kind of a bird's eye view of how this is all playing out, because for people, it just strikes me that for people who are interested in climate, who are worried about climate change, they might not overlap very much with the churchgoers, at least in our country. So I'm wondering, like, which part is taking hold? Is this new? Who is this? Who is this new? For whom is this new? And
Yeah.
where is it? Where is the growth happening?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. About I don't know how many years ago, maybe 8 years ago, there was a huge UN meeting on climate change in New York City. And I usually take my kids around to certain meetings. Now they're older, they don't want to tag along as much as they used to. But I took my oldest son with me, and it was held at, I think, St. John's Cathedral, the big cathedral. One meeting was there was an interfaith interfaith worship service, and Al Gore was present. There were many prominent leaders present, and I was rushing my son. I said, "Hurry up, hurry up." He was a teenager, and you know how teens are, they're a little slow in getting ready. I said, "You gotta hurry up, you gotta hurry up." He only tagged along because it was New York City. And then so he blurted out, because I was, I guess, getting on his nerves. He said, I don't understand why religion is even connected with this climate change meeting or climate change. He said, "What has religion got to do with it?" Because he was really mad that I was hurrying him up. When he added, "What has religion got to do with it?" I said, "Everything." You see, I think people, religious studies is like the first thing to go when colleges are running out of money, or universities. It's it's not an important thing. But religion has such an impact on our society. That's why churches and church leaders are at the NGO, at the COP meeting, because religion impacts these presidents and prime ministers and state leaders and kings who and queens who come to this COP meeting. Religion has a huge impact around the globe. So when I visit different churches around the globe, I know American churches aren't doing as well as, let's say, European churches. I think Europeans are doing a little bit better uh, government wise and church wise, and how they are trying to fight this climate change. So they are planting gardens, they're trying to build more sustainable church, like putting in, different materials to build a church using less heat. I think, you see, we Americans love to be comfortable, so Europeans always make fun of our use of AC, that we're blasting it. So yesterday or the day before, when I was at the airport, I can't remember which airport, they were blasting AC like, oh, it was Kansas City. Gate 8, the agents working when you're checking it had winter coats on. I said, this is too cold. We love AC. People around the globe make fun of Americans using AC. So churches are trying to be more sustainable, either lowering the AC or not blasting the heat in the winter. Last summer, I spent 6 weeks speaking in Australia. So our summer is their winter. So in their winter time churches, many of them don't even turn on their heat, but it's not as cold as here, our winters. But I remember in Brisbane, there's no heat and it was like a cooler. I was so cold and I didn't have a robe because I'm not going to carry a big robe around, but I wish the church had a robe. I had my winter jacket on until I got up to the pulpit and I had a dress on, which I shouldn't have worn, but I was shivering as I was preaching. Like my whole body was shaking. And it's discomfort for me, but it's to say, we don't have to always blast the heat. They don't do that in Korea either. I've been there in the wintertime. They're not blasting the heat. People are just wearing their coats. So why can't we do that? So either church-wise or if in our homes, I'm going past your question, but there's a lot of things. So when I was in Santa Fe, I spoke with the at the Presbytery of Santa Fe, which is a Presbyterian gathering. The church that we were at, the First Presbyterian Church of Santa Fe, the minister said that they are having a hard time trying to put, um, oh, now I can't talk, solar panels on the church. People aren't going to do it, spend the money. But the oldest church, uh, maybe it's called San Miguel. You can Google the oldest church I visited, and he said the oldest church in the US, let's say oldest in quotation, built in 1610, they just put solar panels on their roof. I found that quite interesting. So you can Google it. It's the so-called the oldest church. There was an older church, I think, in Florida, but it was burned down or something. So or it was destroyed, or they destroyed it and built a new church above it. So that's why they say this is the oldest church. So they claim it. There's a plaque in there. There's all this historical data that they're the oldest church. But they just built solar panels. So there's many ways that the church can engage in this, but many churches are a little slower, I think, in the US when you're thinking globally. And sorry if I didn't address your question head on. I just got a little carried away.
Thank you. Anyone else, question, comment? How about kind of piggyback off that? Is there a message or like any information or success stories to the American church? Like what are we missing, or what are some ways to break through, or others that that we're kind of a typical just use, consume, comfort first, not think globally, but they um, until they learn something or a particular question or statement or like some a general question. But is there uh, anything that we could do or
Yeah.
common things to advocate for that can encourage thought or get others to rethink
Yeah,
this?
I think individually and churches really need to think every day, how am I going to work towards saving the planet? Heat is one thing, AC is another, walking versus driving or public transportation. Europeans, they're better at public transportation, but some cities just don't have it, so I understand. But there's many other ways, growing vegetable gardens, and you may not want to consume it, but give it out. There's a lot of poor people who actually want it, or soup kitchens, they all desire vegetable gardens because churches all have plots. And so I've visited churches that are doing this already. So there's many, many things that we can do. At that same meeting I mentioned about 8 years ago, a lot of Europeans came, and we were having breakfast at a hotel. So you know how some hotels are, just plastic forks and plastic plates and plastic cups. These Europeans couldn't believe that we Americans were using all these disposable items during breakfast at a hotel. They were gasping because, if you've ever been to a hotel where they use it, there's bagfuls of garbage after every breakfast because everything is disposable. So I know some places are getting a little better, but it's also the same with the church. We as an American society love disposable. We love convenience. We don't want to wash. We just want to throw away stuff. And I know personally people who just use disposable plates in their homes. I don't understand that. Um, so there's so much that we can do. They're all very small steps that are going to make a huge, huge impact. Because science is telling us this is it's only in the last couple hundred years that human beings have made such an impact so rapidly that we are on the road to destruction. So we have to, everything that we do, when we think about Christian ethics, we don't understand that Christian ethics is everything that you decide every morning as soon as you wake up, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear, what you're going to do. These are all ethical questions, and they're all climate change questions too. What you're going to do to live more sustainably is going to impact the earth, the animals, everything. So I thank you so much for your interest, and I hope individually and as a church, you will help save the planet.
All right, thank you so much. And yes, it's good to have allies and good to be aware of the work that you're doing out there at these organizations and such. So thank you so much. Next week, Sally Smith, Triangle Area Gleaning Coordinator for the Society of St. Andrew, will help us learn a little more about a local agency the congregation supports with her presentation of Gleaning, a biblical practice in modern times. So all right. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Kim, again, and we look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much.